To remain updated with the latest business news, click on the bell icon.
I'd like to introduce our first panel today. Post the pandemic, we saw the emergence of country's first female-led unicorn, Nykaa, valued at $13 billion on listing. It marked the coming of age of a new era of women leaders across India Inc. These women are not only building and running giant companies, they are at the forefront of creating change, whether it be technology, content, sustainability, or empowerment. They are working to put into place new thoughts and structures that will really take the next generation way ahead into the future. Join me in welcoming Dipali Goenka, CEO and Joint MD, Welspun India; Jyoti Deshpande, CEO, Viacom 18; Anjali Bansal, founder, Avaana Capital; and Priti Rathi Gupta, founder, LXME. In conversation with me.
So I was chatting with everyone just before we began, and before we even got into specific themes, the first thing that all the women here said today was, why do we still have to classify gender? And I must admit, the narrative in the last 3 years... Is it working now? Okay. And I must admit, the narrative in the last 3 years has really changed. It's changed from being about gender to being about equal opportunity. So I want to start off today by asking each of you how you're inculcating a culture where we see equal opportunity. You're from very diverse fields, and each of you has been a thought leader. Each of you has been incredibly progressive in your thinking, what you're trying to implement in the workplace, and the kind of change that you're striving to deliver through your work. Jyoti, let me start off with you.
Sure. Thank you very much. I think before I answer your question, I want to give an example from my industry. I think recently everyone would have heard of Gangubai. Yes. You know, Alia Bhatt, Anjali Bansal, Mafia Queen. There's a woman hero in the movie. So that's, women making waves in my line of work. How many of you heard of writing with fire?
Anyone?
Has anyone heard of writing with fire? It's basically a documentary which is up for the Oscars. It's based on the real life of Dalit women who were the first to set up publishing. So there's a lady called Meera, who's editor of the first women's only Dalit magazine. So, we talk about gender, but there's underlying constructs to it like class, caste, which make it even more difficult for women from these places. So I think celebrating these kind of women, using the power of storytelling to bring out some of these stories to light is something that we want to actively do. But to go back to your question.
And I'll add to it, because what you're also pointing towards here is it's about diversity and inclusion. It's not just about gender. But I wonder if that's a corporate buzzword or whether that can actually be implemented more successfully in large corporate houses.
So, short answer, I'm trying to walk the talk. 60%, maybe 70% of my leadership team are all women. So my CFO, CHRO, Chief Creative Officer, Chief Marketing Officer, and many more are women leaders.
All right. Dipali, what about you? And you deal with women from a very different background because you're dealing with women at factories, in smaller towns. Is there a different challenge in ensuring inclusivity there?
Abha, it is. When you talk about textiles, it's predominantly male-dominated. When I started at Welspun in 2010, there were just 8% women. Today we have 26% women. The important part of what we did actually, why women were not coming, we did a multitasking program where it was not just the women who were working, but the man of the house had, also had to respect what the woman was doing. And I think that's where the journey began for us. And after that, now today, it is not just the women workforce on the shop floor, even women in the corporate floor. We call this program called the Women of Welspun, where, these women mentor women in the offices, women at the factories. And I think that's very, very important because it's not just about, because I think when you start working, you should not be just alone. And I think here are women who mentor them through their experiences, guide them. There's a help desk where women can reach out to. So I think that's important to create that environment. Because I think fundamentally when you talk about diversity, it is not just about having women, but also having the peers respect them, creating that environment for them, and even the ecosystem back home. I think that's what we saw in COVID as well, Abha, where women really went through a lot of challenges because it was not just about handling work, it was handling home, children, everything. So I think there should be somewhere they can go to and reach out to as well.
You also make a very conscious effort, Dipali, like Jyoti was saying. But tell us, in terms of percentage of women at the factories, how that's changed. You said 8% when you first started, but give us a sense of what it's really like now. Because I know that this is a very, very emotional, passionate area for you, and you also work towards this very consciously.
So today, on my shop floor itself, I have around 24% women. And it is not just about the factories, but for Welspun, it was a responsibility to create the ecosystem around the factories as well. So I have a program called Spun, where we upcycle rags that are generated at our factories, and women make rugs and cushions out of it. Women couldn't even sign and operate a bank account. So, we did an adult literacy program. Because I think at Welspun, we believe that if a woman is empowered, the child is definitely going to school. So this program, now we have around 200, 300 women working in the communities. It starts from there. And I think, Abha, for me, I'll just quote one example. When I talked about this program, which I tied up with Swasti as an NGO, with one of the biggest global retailers in America. Avani Bhadra is one of the girls who was chosen out of, 1,000 factories of Walmart, actually, to be, flown from Anjar to Arkansas. Wow. What it did was it created many more Avani Bhadras at Welspun. And I think that's very important too.
Amazing and so inspiring. Anjali, you're spearheading change in a very different way, through technology and also through the host of startups that you identify across the board, and also now in the area that you're clearly looking at building sustainability. So let's take it one by one. And first share with us how you feel you can see the nature perhaps of the current generation of founders changing in terms of the kind of problems they're trying to solve. What are you encouraging them to do and build?
Great question, Abha. Let me start first with acknowledging what the statistics that Saurabh laid out, right? Which is true. We have had a decline in female labor force participation. What is often said about India is whatever is true, the opposite is equally true. So we now have a history of very strong women leaders. We've had many women leading banks, financial institutions, female president, female prime minister, female defense minister, which most other countries don't have. And yet we have increasing violence against women. We have declining labor force participation. If I look back at my own journey, in my entering engineering class, we were 15 girls out of 350. If you do the math, it's less than 5%. Today, they say it's closer to 30% entering women in engineering classes. Now, taking technology as an area where there are fewer women. But you don't see the same reflection on the output side. So in some ways, I think on the input funnel, at least in certain segments, we seem to be getting there. The slope of the curve is in the right direction, and yet we don't see women in leadership or even middle management roles. So there is a leaky pipeline issue. I think one of the things we should explore and really aim to address so that 10 years later we are not having the same conversation is why are there not more women? Because there are 50% women in the world, so why should we not have more women? We are seeing also a very positive trend in the entrepreneurial space. So on the one hand, globally and in India as well, very dismal statistics, between 3 to 5% of all venture money goes into female-funded startups. And yet, anecdotally, literally over the last 5 years, I have personally seen, and we have as an industry seen, the rise of some absolutely innovative, technology-led, fantastic, women-led startups which are getting funded not because they're women. The business of investing is all about generating returns. So we've invested in a company called Arogya.ai. Arogya is doing precision antimicrobial drug resistance research. There is Brainside that is doing brain neural mapping to PhDs. Animal, the first ever cattle marketplace started by 2 women, both ex-Pratilipi. And you talked about Nykaa. Falguni has really blazed the trail, and I think we need more role models like that. I've been very fortunate. I was very fortunate to be an early investor in Nykaa. And I think it's just so inspiring. And she has broken all the molds, all your stereotypes of it needs to be, forgive me, but 3 guys from IIT who start a company. Not the case, and shown what success looks like. So we can keep going. But I see both very positive trends, and at the same time, I see how, in some ways, the bias continues. It's still not an old boys club, but a young boys club. We have seen a very positive trend on board representation, where we've gone from 3.5% women on boards 15 years ago, closer to 20% now, supported by legislation, but maybe that's what it takes. So I'll pause there.
All right. Priti, share with us, you've been looking at empowering women in terms of, financial knowledge and taking the leap on that front, whether it be through, of course, your own company, as well as outside of that, angel investing and so much more. Tell us, how you see the future.
Thank you, Abha, and thank you, Business Today, for having me here. So I think, firstly, I come from an absolutely male-dominated field, right? Financial services, at least 15 years back, was as male-dominated as possible. I think the onus of being, or at least leading organizations, one responsibility is that you build diversity. And today, diversity has a lot of tangents to it. But at that point in time, it was just having some sort of female representation, women representation in teams. I think as women leaders, I think within the company, we've always driven that as part of my parent company. We made sure that we are driving, getting that percentage from a 17 to a 35% now. It has been not easy. And I think my deep insight there was that one of the reasons, so, like Anjali mentioned, I think to get more women in the funnel to really rise up and take up leadership roles, where do they drop off and why do they drop off? And one of the biggest reasons was just, having that financial freedom and not really being able to, or having to compromise on a lot of decisions. I think COVID times we've seen more than enough where women have actually dropped from the workforce because they had to make a choice. And a lot of times that compromise where they were not able to pursue their career. So I think that was a deep insight which led me to then form LXME. And I think in some way it is rewriting the rules at LXME, which is one, I think, a team which is, we are actually now looking at building reverse diversity, right? We have a team right now which is 90% women, but also we realize that's not healthy as well, so getting that in, but rewriting those rules, right? Saying that why can a financial services company or a fintech not just be, have a larger percentage of women as well running it. And I think we are exemplifying that in every which way. And beyond that, I think just getting this whole piece of financial freedom, because I think that's a very, very important aspect when it comes to women in workforce, having to compromise on personal front, professional front. I think to us at LXME and to me personally, that's that one piece that we want to really drive and change. And I think for all of that, I think we've been talking blind. What we've done is really dug out data. We've worked on data. We've done a study where we've said, okay, across a metro city, tier 1, tier 2, and we're not, this is across the board. Look at personas: single, married, married with children, or divorced women. What are they doing? What's happening with their money management? I think working on data gives you that ability to then have real actionable, deep actionable impact. So that's one part of what we're doing.
Jyoti, are you a tough boss?
I am a good mix of compassion and I mean business when I mean business.
Okay, because because that's the biggest complaint on the gender front, that our bosses either forced to be more empathetic, or are they more biased toward women employees because they're women? How do we neutralize this debate?
So I think at the leadership level, there's no gender. You're a leader. You could be a man, you could be a woman, you're just a leader. And you have to come to the party, you have to show up and do your bit. So I don't think I treat men and women differently at that level. And I encourage mentorship. I believe that men or women should seriously mentor, their proteges. And I encourage more my women leaders to mentor other women. What I find is actually women are toughest on other women. It is absolutely true that, she mentioned boys club. Our sisterhood somehow is not that strong. चाह के भी हम उतना strong नहीं हो पाते. The boys club managed to, fight as a pack. कहीं ना कहीं हम बिखर जाते हैं.
You've hit a nerve there. Everyone's going to have a word on this, right? And I've had multiple conversations with Anjali on this for sure. She's just being very cool right now. But Anjali, jump in, because you've often said that women will have to go for it. They'll have to fight that extra punch in order to make sure they get that opportunity or claim that opportunity.
So listen, we can't wish it away. There are biases. The only way you can address something is first acknowledging that it exists. So let's acknowledge there is a bias. That bias exists, whether it's in society or in organizations. Let me break it up into 4 pieces. So you have the state, the country, laws. You have organizations, companies, institutions. Then you have families and society. And you have the individual. I think for the most part, progressive states around the world have done their bit. Laws exist for wage parity, for harassment, for generally well-intentioned laws around benefits. They may have unintended consequences, but generally laws are good. Institutions, for the most part, mean well. Progressive companies, again, in India, around the world, are trying, actually genuinely trying hard to attract, retain, grow women, or at least they say so. Then it comes back to all of this exists in the context of the family and society. And you cannot make change happen till attitudes change. So really we are fixing the hardware by fixing systems and processes and policies. We now actually have to work on the software of culture and mindset. And families have to accept this, and she has to want it enough. It's not easy. All of us sitting here are a privileged lot. Most women coming through or in the workforce today don't have a choice really. They have to do the work at home and they have to do the work at work. So how will we get to equitable workplaces if we don't have equitable home places?
Dipali, your story is an example of this, in someone who kind of defied convention and joined the business. Your husband, of course, was very supportive. But perhaps you can share that with us to give us an example of how culture can be changed.
So I think out of all of us here, I got married at the age of 18, and I started working when my girls were 10 and 7. I come from a conservative community, the Marwari community, where boy plays a very important part. And I didn't want that for my daughters.